Thank you. Let's check the time. Looks like it's 5:30. So I'll call this special city council meeting to order Tuesday, May 26th. First thing is the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Kreitz, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. If you could call the roll, please.
Tonight's roll call. McClure.
Here.
Osenga.
Here.
Cease.
Here.
Bachlan.
Present.
Butts is excused. Kreitz. Here. Mayor Terry.
Yes.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is citizen comments on any subject except those items scheduled for public hearings. We don't have any public hearings with this special city council meeting. Madam Clerk, are there comments or phone calls to be made?
No, ma'am. No comments.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda and consent agenda.
I move for the approval of the agenda and the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Osenga. And nothing is on the consent agenda. Madam Clerk, would you call for a roll, please?
Voting on tonight's agenda. Osenga.
Yes.
McClure.
Yes.
Kreitz.
Yes.
Cease.
Yes.
Bachlan.
Yes.
Mayor Terry.
Yes.
Your agenda is approved.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is new business, other items, other new business items. Review and discuss the city's draft COVID-19 recovery plan. Just for council, we have the binder of the forms in front of us. I think we're going, it's right now we're under a special meeting, but we'll run it more like a work session. So I'll turn it over to the city attorney and then we'll just take turns if we have questions. But city attorney and administration to just present the materials and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
You wanna?
Me or you? Do you wanna?
Either way, I usually take this off so people couldn't hear me. So I do want to apologize. I meant to call for a work session and then if we move this forward to go to a special meeting for adoption. That's kind of my bust. But so the city attorney is here. Ms. Wells is here to present the plan. Obviously, this all changed on us Friday when the governor released the updated mandates at 4 p.m., which, and of course, in our timing of things, that's not the best thing to have happen. So we're going to just kind of present it a little bit different fashion as to what Ms. Wells has adjusted over the weekend. And then we can kind of go back and forth if you like that method. And
So with your recovery, your COVID-19 recovery plan came about because the administration wanted to make sure that Seward was thinking ahead. We certainly hope that COVID-19 has had its peak, but we also know that there is a chance that COVID-19 will remain with us and be something Alaskans are reacting to into the fall, if not beyond. The goal was to have a recovery plan that paid attention to where you are now, but also adopted the state 4 metrics for analyzing what impact COVID-19 is having on the community and providing for a trigger to allow the city to move very quickly into what we call community outbreak rules or orange alert rules if the COVID-19 state in Seward deviates from the state in Alaska. So if Alaska's on phase 4 as a whole, but there's a outbreak in Seward, this allows you to move very quickly into a new, more restrictive state. There's a very specific process for how Seward gets there that is tailored to the community, but also this allows the public and council to be involved on the front end, talking about what a more restrictive state would look like and ensuring that you're getting the public input into the process. So this recovery plan process is something that a lot of the communities I've worked with have adopted in some shape or form. It originated from, Whittier was one of the first to seek out a recovery plan because they are so small. They have to move very quickly if they have a few cases. Cordova is also examining a recovery plan. They're a little bit behind Seward's process, so they are, we'll be looking at this next week. And one of the goals is the state has a red, yellow, green code signaling process. And they tell you, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? It's yellow, we're going slow, we're cautious, we have some social districting mandates and advisements, green, we're wide open. So what this does is it adopts that state's code signaling process and the metric analysis they use to get there, but it also adopts a local orange alert. And that local orange alert is a way to easily advertise and communicate with the public that we have now deviated from the state plan. Now, hopefully, local orange alert will never be needed, but this allows for council to really delve in and be a part of setting those rules and having that conversation for administration to really engage with council. Because if we do, a lot of times if we do rules, emergency rules, simply reactive to the COVID-19 state at a given time, those rules seem unilateral, they're surprising for the community, there's impacts that maybe are not necessarily anticipated, and this really helps curve that and make it a true community effort. So I think, and that was the goal. So there are a few other models out there, but I have not seen any adopted in Alaska that have a more generalized, comprehensive approach. Most of them stem from economic development committees that are looking really at some of the how do we continue to function and thrive economically as we go through that. And I find those reports really helpful. So those reports are included in your appendix under local resources. In addition, so I'm going to just walk you through the table of contents, but I'm going to take a breath and check in with you and see, as far as an overview, if does anyone have any concerns or questions, comments?
So part of the landscape is that statewide, as they go to stage 5 next, things are very open, and it will be very dependent on local issues. So issues, say in our community or those around us, it's going to be really kind of pointed towards us to do something rather than a statewide action like we've seen in the past.
So I do have just a couple questions, just as an overview. One, if we adopt our own rules, we would obviously be in charge of enforcing them, correct? Or
Correct.
will we have state assistance with that?
No, you would be in charge of, if you go to an orange outbreak, an orange alert, at that point, whether you enforce or don't enforce will fall to Seward.
And then the other thing is, with all the, as the governor was talking about working with local governments, he was saying the state will work on targeted plans. The state will do this, the state will do that. So I was kind of being led to believe when he says the state will work with communities, the state will do this or that, that if say we became some sort of hotspot where we started to have multiple cases quickly, that the state would be helping us provide the guidance and work on that. You haven't heard that from the state? Like, I just wonder what that language is coming from the governor.
So what the governor did, I think they did take that step, and the way they did that is they issued a correspondence to the municipal league that said, hello municipalities, we would like you to consider using our metrics when you're weighing what you need to do on a local level, so that you may need to respond on a local level. We understand that. We give you the following advice. Here are the 4 metrics. So that really was the starting place. We started with what the state said that they wanted to see from communities, and part of the procedure in your plan is making sure you send any code orange declaration to the state so that they are aware and they are involved and they can be a part of the communication, and to the extent it makes sense, enforcement, especially with the Department of Health and Social Services, we do need that is a very collaborative effort. They will be doing trace contacts, investigations, things like that, and we'll follow their lead generally on that. But, so I guess this plan really is that next step. It's going to where the state wants the municipalities to go. I think, at least at this stage, they have really they have not gone so far as to suggest they're going to do a plan for you or enforce or call or identify hotspots. That said, if a hotspot is hot enough, it will influence the 4 metrics of the state plan.
Yeah.
And generally, the hope is by adopting the state plan and following it except for where this trigger is, that's really your fail-safe. And Seward will continue to follow the state of Alaska, and the state of Alaska will in turn be responsive to Seward, that our numbers will fall within metrics. It makes that clear so people know where Seward stands. It preserves mutual aid agreements and some of the more notice-based protocols that just ensure that the city has the information it needs to interact and communicate with businesses and keep the public informed, but not go so far where we've created a set of rules that deviates from the state without really doing the metric analysis.
Okay.
I had a question. The state rules supersede the city rules.
It depends on the rule. So in general, the state of Alaska has not made their rules preemptive. There are travel mandates that the state has adopted unless you have a small community exemption order, which we don't fall under. Seward doesn't fall under that. You would be preempted from adopting travel mandates that differ from the state. Another one is there's healthcare operations guidance. That is one guidance that the state of Alaska has said this preempts municipal laws and mandates. So those are the 2 areas, travel, healthcare. Otherwise, the state not only has stayed away from preempting local mandates, but they've acknowledged that municipalities may need to do this. They have, though, in their letter, which is in your appendix D, they have identified what they want to see municipalities if you're going to, because they really want a very uniform approach. That's in the state's best interest, and the governor really wants to see that. So we try to stay within what the state's intent is for their ultimate plan. And Scott, jump in here if I'm deviating at all from.
Yeah, and I think the piece, like you asked if the state comes and enforces it, no, they don't enforce any of the state mandates. They look to the local jurisdiction to do that. Our harbor master and police department have turned in pretty significant complaints, and nobody's come down, nobody's followed up. I don't know, they're not here right now to say they never followed up on the items we turned in, and they do expect the local jurisdiction, if there's going to be citations or any kind of enforcement action, that comes at our level. The state's not going to send, they don't have the resources to send someone down to deal, for example, with the fishing charter boats or people that they would do that with quarantine. If we had people that DHSS has said these people need to be quarantined and there's proof they're violating that, the health nurse and the local medical system would be involved in that, though. But it would be local enforcement, not a. So I don't know if that clarifies that or not, but.
So, can I just say something or clarification? So this basically just gives us a method of dealing with an outbreak. If we have a localized outbreak here, is what this does. We're going to follow the state completely, but this just gives us something to, if we have to deal with an outbreak, this gives us the wherewithal to do it.
Exactly. What it does is it says, okay, Seward's recovery plan is an adoption of the state plan. Then it communicates what the state plan is, because we don't know, in 6 months there might be a change to the metrics and we may have to update this. Mm-hmm. And that you may want to or not want to at that time, right? So step 1 is, what exactly is the state's plan? Seward then is declaring that it's adopting that plan. However, instead of just red, green, yellow, it's adding local, which allows the community outbreak rules. And the outbreak rules, there's really one. I mean, there's two. One deals with medical quarantine and making sure that Seward can follow up if there's a violation of medical quarantine. And I think that really stems from the state's need to have the police department be able to engage in that. So that's one of the rules. But the main rule is if there is a community outbreak, the city of Seward goes back to Public Health Mandate 11, which is the state of Alaska mandate that was the hunker down order, for lack of a better term. It's their social distancing mandate. And it was effective March 27th. That's the one, so that's really all you're doing, and as part of your rules, you have a copy of that mandate. So you're staying as close to the state's own guidance. You're simply kind of moving back in time to a different phase, right? Sort of going to phase one. I mean, I guess phase 1A was sort of the first time we sort of started moving towards reopening. So you're kind of going back to phase one. And in order to do that, it doesn't happen automatically. So your city manager does not say, there's 3 new cases in Seward, we're in a community, we're in orange alert. You actually, council is engaged in that process. So we can walk through that when you guys are ready. I'll walk you through that process, because you can change all of this as living document. All of this is a proposal, and you can scrap all of it, or you can adopt it, or change some of it. It's really designed to have your input and for you to be a part of
So I
the
know
plan.
we want, because I have some input on what that would look like, but I'll go to Councilmember Buckwan. Did you have another question?
I'm ready for that explanation,
Yeah,
because I
let's-
want to know.
Yeah, I have some input on numbers and what that should look like, so I'll let you go.
Okay, so you want to start moving through the procedure? All right, so I think the easiest way is if we all turn to page 3, plan itself. So before we get here, just one thing to say. So what happens is your medical team, through your emergency operations plan, along with your city manager, your incident command, will be looking at epidemiology, testing, public health capacity, and healthcare capacity. Those are your 4 metrics. They're going to look at those, and if something happens when they're looking at those metrics that puts up the red flag where they feel like they need to move to orange alert, they're going to take that movement as fast as they need to in order to protect health and preserve public safety. But so the first step they'll do is they'll post notice on the city website and in 3 other locations declaring local orange alert, so everybody knows. They'll post a copy of the community outbreak rules and the effective date and time of the rules on the city website. So there will be an implementation, as proposed anyway, right away, because we need to react quickly. At that time, they'll send a notice electronically, or they'll hand deliver to each council member within 24 hours the declaration of Code Orange, and within 5 days of declaring orange alert, the city council will hold an emergency meeting, and they will either approve the orange alert status or they'll deny it. Now, so one of the things that I was really trying to do for Seward is ensure that you have clear public participation in the process. So this one is different than a lot of the plans that I've drafted. This is more, there's more involvement here. I've put in here that it will include a telephonic or video conference public hearing so that members of the public can sign up to comment on the declared local orange alert or the implementations of the community outbreak rules. So that's something to.
So since we're on this page, and I can hold my comments if I need to, but right at the top it says, maintain COVID-19 positive tests of less than 5 cases in a 14-day period. So we have the long-term care facility, and we also have a prison. So I think 5 cases, I hate even saying these words out loud, but if we have, an outbreak in one of those populations, shutting down Seward is not going to solve that problem. So you know, I would like some language in here that talks about within the general public. Do you hear what I'm saying? Like, I don't think we should shut down all of Seward if we have 50 cases in the prison because you don't have that transfer factor. But that's just my opinion. So knowing that we have those institutions in Seward, I think that that should be something to think about.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds good to me. I mean, when we looked at the metrics, we talked with the medical team and sort of said what makes sense for Seward. So that's where we started. But I think that conversation based on where the direction council wants to go can be a much more comprehensive, and we can make sure we bring notes like that and make sure the plan gives them that type of discretion and makes clear that one metric, you may have one positive case, but because of the nature of the case or where it is or what you're seeing as a result, even before you get other positive cases, it might require action, right? Or you may have 50 that doesn't. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I can definitely see the need to make sure there's discretion and yet clarity so the medical team does not feel like they bear the burden of this without.
Making that decision.
Yes, exactly. And you might want to.
The only thing I have to say about that would be the discretion, if you're talking about the prison, Mountain Haven is also thinking about the staff that are in and out of those facilities. So that would be a concern, if you're going to test every one of their staff, then, maybe you don't do the 14-day quarantine, but if that's not a possibility, I think there needs to be at least some quarantine period because you do have in and out of those facilities.
And you don't think those facilities wouldn't implement that on their own? We would need to do that in a plan?
I mean, I don't know how that, I'm not sure what the prison's plan is on if they do have a positive case. So they're going to quarantine their entire staff to stay there and
we should have that on file.
Yeah,
what their plan is.
Doug and I met with the superintendent and discussed those things. They are similar to what Icicles is doing. It's a very stringent, very closed, contained system. And most of their, not all, but most of their staff is actually out of Anchorage. So due to their shifts, it's a minimal amount of people that actually live here in Seward. There's a few. But they have those processes, they have their screening in place, very stringent, temperature taking, screening every person that comes and goes from the facility. And I don't know what their timeline is on that, but that's currently in place until the emergency's lifted. Those are the kind of things that we're looking for as this being a discussion. We don't want to just present something that gets approved that, okay, now if we get, 5 cases or, we looked at like, do you get 3 cases a day for X amount of days and that causes alarm? Do you get 15 or 20 cases tomorrow, which would be a help with our facility capacity? Those are the kind of things it's really hard to put a number to trigger this, but it still has to come back for the activation within that 5 days. So it really kind of goes back to how this all started. And that process would be implemented if we see some threshold, but it's difficult without engaging that comment to determine what is right for Seward without that healthcare and public comment and the council's weigh in.
Are any other communities not looking at cases but looking at when ICU beds start to get filled? Because people being sick is one thing, using up the capacity of our hospital is another. So like, I know we have, 3 beds at our hospital, and then we have a surge center of up to 26. So I mean, if we, still like people getting sick is one thing, but then what we're really trying to protect is making sure that critical infrastructure. So I mean, have any other communities said if we have 10 of our ICU beds filled, then we will go to the next step?
Well, and I think that's a really good point because the way the metrics work is really not one, they work together, right? It's a balancing, and one might trigger it, or maybe you have 2 where you're, okay, we've got some cases, they're not quite hitting our case number here, but we're seeing our healthcare capacity go up. So most of the communities are adopting we have these 4 metrics, we look at each one, and among them are, we do have our healthcare capacity and public health capacity, which sort of both get to your comments, which is, let's make sure we're looking at the reality of COVID-19 here in Seward and not just a number, right? So I think that One thing that might be useful before you finalize the plan is maybe being very clear. And I will talk with the medical team and the emergency operations team, make sure that we are clear that, is this a balancing test? Do you need one, where's the discretion? So it's clearly stated, and then it can be, they have this ability to move and pay attention to the unknowns, which absolutely would include the amount of beds, the capacity for care. And because sometimes we may have a reduced capacity, not as a result of COVID, but a result of something else, and that might influence the reaction to COVID.
And locally, we had like, our discussion with Commissioner Crum was like, if everyone at the post office is sick, all 4 of them, you have no postal operations in Seward. Or like, let's say Safeway has an employee and they have a staff meeting and everyone that works for Safeway cannot come. That's a community issue because a lot of people in the surrounding areas may shop there. There's other options, but as a community, that would really disable the whole community's capacity for food and shopping.
But what would going to Orange do to solve that issue?
So it's not, doing the condition isn't necessarily going to prevent anything, but I think when you get into that mode, instead of looking to say, uh-oh, now we have to do something, you have a preempted plan and a process to enact it. So
it's designed to stop the spread of the outbreak. Now, one thing you can do, the same way that it was used, our numbers were pretty low in Alaska. Public Health Mandate 11 came out to keep them low, is the theory behind the goals and objectives of the state. They're opening back up. If those metrics require them when looked on a statewide level, they will also be stepping back. So this is simply, sometimes the state and Seward will not necessarily step in line based on the on-the-ground facts, in theory. So this allows Seward to do, in essence, what the state will be doing, but to do it when it's on a more localized level. One of the things to really consider, though, the way this is written, Orange Alert gets triggered, and then it comes to council within 5 days. That's the most protective approach, right? You allow your emergency operations team to trigger local Orange Alert. Another option is to have your management team identify the need for Orange Alert and come to council within, say, 48 hours, you call a special meeting, to declare the Orange Alert. So before anyone's liberties or their freedoms are restricted, council is weighing in, the public is weighing in, and you're getting that information, so you can ask specific questions tailored to the situation. So that's another option, and we can move the procedures around to make that a reality, if that's something you're interested in.
A lot can happen in 5 days.
I know 5 days is, and lately we have learned, right? We have learned that 5 days is a lifetime. Oh, so I'll finish those procedures if everybody's okay with that. There's just 2 more. So after the hearing, after the meeting with council, if the Orange Alert status continues, the deviation from the state's code level, the reasons behind the Orange Alert and its status should be reported to the state. And again, that's just to make sure that conversation is being had and we are acting in line with them as opposed to in conflict. The last procedure, the city manager and I talked about this. We put it in there really to get your thoughts. That might be a little bit burdensome to try to provide each business a copy of the rules and notification. At the same time, the goal is to make sure there's no surprises. So with the last itemized rule or procedure, the city would notify businesses notify businesses registered with the city of the Orange Alert status and provide them a copy. The theory being perhaps we could create a system where they let us know beforehand, hey, I want to know when this happens, and we can have a listserv or something to get that information to them.
Could it be electronic? instead of paper?
I think so.
Yeah, and it's hard because most of the help we've had on this came through the chamber. So their members aren't all just City of Seward businesses.
Right.
They're surrounding member businesses. And so like anything we do in formal Seward may not apply to the businesses in the borough.
Yeah, but they should know.
And they probably, yeah, it'd be
They come
good.
here, they should know what we,
It's been a good way to disseminate our information, but there has been a little bit of confusion about those that are chamber members but don't have their businesses in the city limits. But I think it doesn't hurt to broadcast that on a wider scope than just keeping it to just those in the city.
So because of the type of borough the Kenai Peninsula Borough is, I believe they have health powers, don't they? Are they doing something like this also?
The borough is not, the way that the emergency operations plan for the boroughs and cities function, the city really is the first line of defense. The borough acts as an umbrella. So there are certain funds that go through the borough. They have certain organization structures for the collaborative response of the municipalities. But when it comes to rules for operations outside the borough offices, they're looking to cities. So Seward and Homer and Kenai, they all have their various approaches, but they're not borough managed at the emergency operation level.
And then do you know, so if we have a case of someone that lives outside city limits, will it be reported as a Seward case? So I mean, then that skews our numbers, and then we have no control of people outside of the city.
Yeah.
So it's like half people live inside, half people live outside. You know, we're not really targeting the problem with a hatchet instead of a scalpel.
Yeah, and I know that the Department of Health and Social Services determines where they're going to report, yes, what gets reported where. I know they're trying to find ways to communicate cases and where they're happening by identifying them as non-resident COVID-19 cases and things like that, especially with the processors and fishing industry and the influx of non-resident workers. But I don't know exactly how. I've heard Doctors Inc. talk about how they identify where a case is and how that impacts the state's interaction with that community, but it was, admittedly, I think it was 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's evolving because of
I was
the
trying to listen
industry.
And I don't think we had enough cases here to say like, oh, this was in Moose Pass.
Yeah.
It's all kind of Seward because that's where the mail is, or that's where people report that they live.
Yeah.
So it's a misnomer a little bit. I don't think we have enough data on that to see any of that happen.
Councilmember Buckland, you were being very patient to go through this, and then I started asking the questions again. Did you have a question, sir?
No, I don't see any problem with it if we're gonna convene to go over approving it or not at that point. I am concerned about having something like this that's on top of the state mandates, because we've gone around and got into debates about masks and all kinds of things like that, so it does get into something where going into this I was like, why don't we just follow what the state does? But I can see how this is getting something else that can protect us from an outbreak here. So yeah,
One thing to follow up on that, just because I did take the facial covering rule and put that in your outbreak rules for consideration. I am expecting that is not one that you might want to keep, but I just wanted it, I figured it was easier to chop it than it was to add it. So in the community outbreak rules, that's rule 0-1.
It's there.
So before you adopt this, I mean, and we'll walk through everything, but that's just, I want to flag that. That's really so you can see the language, and you don't have a facial covering rule now, and that's not covered by the mandate. So I think it's completely appropriate for you to strike that. But again, easier to strike than add, so.
I guess the other thing too that I'm concerned about is enforcement. So that the state hasn't set a good example of enforcement, and so I think people are tenant at their own risk at this point. So, it does clearly say in here that it's either, a misdemeanor, or $1,000 fine, or $1,000 fine. So, how do we see that as enforcing if we do, it mentions also like closing down or asking businesses to cease operations, and to have cleaning protocol. Like, how do we, is it just the 72 hours close, let, everything reset itself, or do they have to clean and sanitize and atomize or whatever they need to do, So I don't know, it's so complicated and so many parts that it's hard to think about sometimes. And I do understand what the mayor is saying too. What is an outbreak? How, and that's why I like coming back to us to say, well, this is an emergency or a yellow, orange. What is an emergency? How can we handle it? Are we within our means of handling it? So. I mean, what was the goal of today? Was it to?
So I think the state's not gonna do what has already happened to the whole state again. So if we have like a major outbreak in Seward or in other communities, you're gonna have this localized, the state saying, hey, you have an outbreak in this part of the state. It's the local jurisdiction that needs to kind of enact these rules to go back. I don't think you're gonna see the overarching DHSS saying the city of Seward has to do this because of your outbreak. They might, depending on how severe that looks, but it's a plan of action should this really spike and become an issue locally. I think it's easy to look in hindsight if we don't have anything like this in place and say, gee, how come they didn't do something, or why didn't the administration present something when you do have the catastrophic huge event happen, right? So you put something into place and you hope that it doesn't have to be utilized. But then if it does, we have a roadmap to kind of take us back to stage one to say, okay, the bars and restaurants and all that goes back to where they're closed or they're not doing sit down. And if we have that big of an event here, you're gonna probably need that. So what makes that come to effect? And I don't think the state's gonna do that statewide again. I don't think that's in the cards. So if there are outbreaks, there may not be. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell what's gonna happen as they open up. But there's gonna be localized patches where there are people that come into contact and it spreads. And what happens if that happens here? What happens if it's 70 or 100 people? What if it's 20 people? What's the significance with our healthcare system? It doesn't take much for us to be inundated here. If we have 30 critically sick patients, we have a problem. We really, anybody that's critically ill is probably going to be transported. I mean, but what if you need to transport 30 people per day, right? That's a problem with our transportation infrastructure, with the ambulances and the air traffic. That's probably way too much. So is it 5 it's hard to make that threshold, but these are templates and guidelines that kind of let us have these discussions to say, yeah, that doesn't really look feasible, or I don't know. That's why it's good to engage the medical side of this as well as to kind of use what we've gone through with the state. And I think, you could say, hey, we don't want to do any of this. And we still have this drafted so that if we need to enact it, we could come back to that and put it into place very quickly. On the other hand, if you do adopt it, hopefully we never need to utilize it and proceed from there.
Jerry, I would think that it would be better that we have something planned out before we have to hurry up and institute something. Seems to me like it'd be prudent at this time to just maybe have some kind of a plan already made up.
So based on,
I just have a question for the city manager. Could you just explain rule number 7 in personnel policies where it says other benefits or terms and conditions of employment? Is
Where
that-
are you at?
This is page 205 in appendix B. B is in boy. Thank you.
Oh, 205?
205.
205.
B.
It just says, other benefits or terms and conditions of employment. What are other benefits?
That's Rule 7.
so, and I can
Yeah.
comment on this. I mean, the purpose of this rule is, at the time emergency rules were drafted, we had a COVID-19 outbreak coming, but we didn't know what that was going to look like, and we didn't know what community it would look like. So it was really important for the city manager to be able to hire, promote,
And I just
adopt
wanted to know what
benefits and
other benefits
terms.
or terms and conditions of employment was.
right, so that is, the goal was to give fluidity to your administration. So whatever benefits, for example, now we know that there are benefits for individuals who are COVID positive or to have a family member that are COVID positive, and what we're required to do under the Family Medical Leave Act is different than it was, 5 months ago. And so we want to make sure that in a case where a city manager would want to give a benefit that isn't necessarily something anticipated by the city, but is warranted given the outbreak, to ensure that employees are kept safe and that the city offices are able to run efficiently. A benefit, for example, of working from home or remotely, or the resources they need to work remotely. So the purposes of the emergency rules you have in place are to ensure that the city administration can respond, some of them, so that they can respond to the declared emergency in the most efficient way possible.
And terms and conditions of employment?
So same difference, right? You might have somebody that you are now hiring, who you've hired to fill one job, but now they're also taking on hand sanitation centers and posting signs on X issue because you've lost 50 employees to COVID-19, and they're, so their job description and the terms of their employment have now shifted in a way that you could not have anticipated and would not exist outside the declared state of emergency. So that's why when the Seward City Council declared a state of emergency, or promulgated the declared state of emergency, and your emergency operations plan came into play, that is why we see emergency rules under that plan and anticipated by our code in that plan, so that there can be this collective fluid effort to respond and react. So that's what that is. Those rules have come, that rule in particular has come before council already and been ratified. So, but that's also a rule that if council wants to revisit the rules, this is a great opportunity to do that, because they are incorporated and included in your recovery plan. But those are your adopted rules as they stand. This suggests amendments to them just to ensure that you're staying in line with the state, that you're allowing for the city meetings and offices to open up, and for the city to get back to full operations and move into phase 4 of the state plan. Does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you.
I just have some concerns with the 5-day delay. I mean, that's pretty long delay between having all the businesses closed down and then having it come to council. So, and I don't necessarily think it needs to be approved by us, but I wonder, could it be like within 48 hours or not more than 5 days after? I mean, I think it needs to come to council pretty quickly.
I think
Yes.
48 hours is completely appropriate.
Yeah.
If
I agree with that.
if council, and so that would be great to get direction on. Maybe we could walk through a few motions or points for direction, including that, and that way we can, I think the first one would be, does council want to adopt a recovery plan at all? Do they want to take that step now? Presuming, of course, there's input on the terms, but do we want to adopt a recovery plan, or do you want to plan presented to you at a meeting for adoption. And then we can walk through each step, each of the, with that?
I think it would make sense to have a backstop that hopefully we never have to implement. I think Councilmember Senga agrees. I don't know if anyone disagrees. Okay.
Okay, all right. And so then the next one, I'm going to go to page 3 of the plan itself. And that's, so just of the, not in the appendices, in the recovery plan itself. And then go to, so what if we said, send the notice electronically or via hand delivery to council members within 10 hours? And then move the meeting to 48 hours.
No more than, instead of 5 days, it's just like right at the
Oh,
very
3 or 4.
beginning. Yeah, it's number 3.
That's okay. Yeah.
I mean, I guess at that point, we need to make sure that we're giving adequate public notice, but if it's 48 hours, we'd be able to notice within 24 hours.
6 hours for an emergency.
Okay.
So what was suggested, no more than, instead of 5 days, you said 24 hours?
Well, I said
What did you
48, but
say?
24 would work. I just.
You said
as long-
48, okay.
Because we do have a 6-hour notice provision for emergency meetings right now, so that, we could do 24, but
I think
I said
48,
48.
make sure that we're getting public notice, but it's.
That's better.
And then the next thing, based on the mayor's comments earlier, do you want us to bring the medical team before council when we're looking at adoption of the plan to walk through the metrics? Or do you want us to have a letter prepared and sort of talk about, does the council have any input on how the metric system is brought before them or incorporated into the plan? I guess that would be my.
I feel that it would be, there's so many questions on different things that we would know here, especially with Councilmember Kreitz here, who could possibly represent somewhat of the medical community, and how we felt from, and feedback from the rest of the community, that we'd be able to make a decision without, having more consultation. I mean, really,
If we have an adequate written walkthrough, or would you like to see a presentation? Which way are you going?
I wouldn't want any other feedback other than what our considerations would be from the public and from, I'm sure we would hear from our public health nurse or our public health officer.
I think what would happen, or what we anticipated, is your incident command and your medical team would get together and say, special emergency meeting, we have the following happen, here are the 4 metrics, and there'll be a small report under each metrics, or if it's one metrics that's really tipping the scale, right, it's something that's happening in one, like our healthcare capacity cannot handle this, even though our numbers aren't that large, we have a problem, and we need to deal with this now. Now remember though, when they're doing this, they'll be looking at the outbreak rules as, does the impact of the metrics analysis warrant the outbreak rules that come with a code orange? Because sometimes you may have a problem, but that may not be the solution.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't declare code orange, or council might say, we see that you have this problem, thank you, but we don't see, we cannot find, if there's a disconnect between the solution and the problem. So that's.
Won't address the problem.
Or make it worse.
Or make it worse.
So maybe it's important, I think, Councilmember McClellan, I think you make a good point. It's probably important to leave that flexibility there, because we don't know what we're talking, we don't know what we're talking about. We don't know what they're gonna be reporting, and if it's something that they're gonna have time to sit down and do a written assessment, or if they're gonna be in front of you saying, this is the deal. So legally it doesn't matter, but I think that is a good point. We maybe don't need to be more clear. The metrics is here, so. I mean, do you have?
Yeah, and I just think, hey, we had 15, 20 cases today. Or there's so many people that are sick that we've extinguished our swabs and we have no capacity. We do have, throughout all the healthcare facilities here, we have enhanced capacity, additional supplies. But what happens if 6 months from now, triggers up, we're out of the emergency, and something like that occurs? So that's where we really need to look at these. They're through the state's plan, but like locally, hey, we're in a problem. People need to be tested. We don't have the ability to do that. Or we have this many cases all of a sudden for some reason. It's going to be communicatively discussed in our OEM partners and through our command center and with the healthcare people, but it's like, it makes sense to have the roadmap in place to be able to just say, hey, yeah, we're there. It's not just going to be one person making that call. So I think it's well articulated. I just think, it's hard to put like, oh, so many cases per day. It's really hard to flesh that out. I think that's what I've struggled with looking at it, and we've talked about that a lot and tried to figure out, every community is a little different. I mean, technically we have 4 hospital beds, an overflow center. We have other healthcare facilities here. It doesn't take a whole lot for us to be in a position where we need to identify, do we need to do something else? Hopefully we don't have to even get there.
And I think one thing we can do in the draft that we bring before you for adoption, we'll really go through that again with the medical team and sit down and say, is having a number in here beneficial? Do we want to do that? Or is that, or can we really work through what is the most effective? And maybe that's not it. Maybe being clear that there's a balancing here and that we don't need to give a threshold in order for there to be a threshold. It could be 5 cases still, but we don't necessarily have to mandate that in your plan or lay that out in your plan, because it can be as restrictive as it is
Because it
helpful.
could be 5
Yeah.
cases in the same family.
Right.
And then you
Absolutely.
have, they could be traveling and come back and all
Sure.
5 be sick, and then we don't need to trigger a plan for that.
And they may have 0 direct contacts once they
Yeah.
arrive because they could have put themselves in quarantine. So, it's the perfect example. And so we can walk through all of those, and then what we bring back.
I have a
What
question
might be able to-
real quick before I lose my train of thought, but we wouldn't be able to know certain things about them because that's medical history, right? So, like how the state gives out cases, they just give ages and within numbers. So how feasible is it to know very specifics about these cases to
Well, I know.
keep HIPAA violation, to avoid HIPAA violations, but
The
to
way it was
know?
reported, at least like the Seward cases, was that it was, this case was a travel-related case. Next case was a contact to the travel, that's how it was reported, when it was reported.
So we'll be able to get that
You would at least be able to get that
But we
information,
don't
yeah.
Or
And
if there's five in one
DHSS will-
family.
It would have been an answer like 5 in one family. Would that be like an answer?
It probably wouldn't say in the same family, it would say
Yeah.
in.
Household.
And contact, like
Contact.
close contact, or, yeah.
And we've had cities in Alaska, more than one, that there was vectors in the building and several of their departments cleared floors. So now they have like a floored, tiered plan. And this happened in a large city and a small city. So, most of their city staff was exposed. So the whole building was pretty much quarantined. How does that look if all of our staff is not here? Those kind of things are definitely going to trigger some kind of necessary action on the city's part.
And DHSS does work with the city medical team and work with the city. So while there's HIPAA protections in place, of course, there is a collaborative group that's getting more information. So your emergency operations team will have information in order to conduct their metrics analysis in most situations, even though they won't necessarily be able to share all of that information
All the
with
personal
council.
information, yeah.
Yeah, so when they're making the assessment, they will know a lot more than they, and they'll know what the direct contact tracing looks like, what the exposure looks like. That's a really collaborative, or it's intended to be a very collaborative effort. I know the state is working really hard to do that. So then I have one more question, which is the facial covering and the outbreak rules. When we bring the outbreak rules back, the orange alert rules, do you want to see a facial covering rule in there, or do you feel that especially, because remember, we're going back to Health Mandate 11, which really puts us, unless you're an essential worker or critical infrastructure employee, which includes a lot of people, but it really puts a lot of people back in their homes, so maybe you don't need that. But this is reacting to an orange alert, so maybe it's something you do want. That is just one area I think we need to take your pulse.
Are there any comments? I think we've heard from our public pretty clearly that they're not interested in it, but I'm just one council member at this time.
Well, there's not a lot of facial coverings being worn now, even though it's recommended. I mean, if you looked around this weekend, but I think mostly those people were not from here either. I think the locals have been doing a pretty good job, but.
Not at the grocery store, I don't think. You go in that grocery store and there's people you know and they don't wear them.
I think mandating face masks would cause more of a problem. I think that then people would gather together in rallies and we'd cause more of an outbreak, honestly.
Well, maybe we can leave it in and amend it out later so they can read it.
Do you want to leave it in and
No.
then have them? Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, I think it should be left in and at least say encouraged.
Yeah, or recommended.
Okay.
I mean, which I know it's outbreak rules, but I don't think that there's a problem
Right, instead of must.
recommended or included and
Okay.
no fine attached to it, but that might get more compliance rather than saying you have to do something.
Okay, so when we bring it back, I'll put some should language in there as opposed to must, and then you can, council can revisit it again. I mean, we can always take it out at the next meeting, but that will,
I'm just trying to envision an orange alert being called, and so we vote to call the orange alert because it's an obvious, serious reason. And it's a weekend which they're coming up again, like this last weekend, when we've got bazillions of people. Do we go around with a speaker and from the police and tell them, orange alert, you need to leave? Because it's now hunkering down? I mean, has that been considered, what to do with all the tourists?
yeah, it will be very hard if it happens in the middle of tourist season,
And-
especially. But I think the hope is that you can have, just like when there's a fire, a billboard blinking, we've gone under orange alert. It's orange alert, we are back to hunker down in Seward, hunker down in Seward. And then you can give them more information as you can, but it won't be precise. It won't be the type of, and I think this is really tough for all of us. I think the implementation of rules in an incredibly expedited fashion means that there'll be lots of people not in compliance.
You know what though, you know what really helped at the state level that isn't in here is that delay. Like, there should be, if once we declare, it's not immediate, like people
Have to have.
if we could declare alert and then it'll happen the next day at 8 a.m. or,
Sure.
that
And
was
we
a
can
big
build
problem
that
in Anchorage, yeah.
Yeah, we can.
So they closed the bars and then didn't give any notice. So I mean, we need to allow people to have notice.
I think that's great. I think that can easily be added, and I think especially because council is acting within 48 hours, then maybe we require 24 hours, which at the front end. So really, we're getting about 72 hours out before council approves it or holds the orange alert to the extent it needs to be. It may be something that's over quickly, but I'll put, does 24 hours work for,
Well,
or do you
yeah.
want to do 48 hours?
Well, and I wasn't thinking to have it add to the time. I mean, it could happen concurrently to our meeting and approving it. You know what I mean? Like declaring the orange alert within, You know, it just depends on what, if you do it noon on one day, you could have it effective, I mean, it should be 5 PM at least the following day, or midnight the following day.
Okay.
You know, it's like you go into the hospital to have a baby, your clock starts. So like, say they declare it on a Monday, it's midnight Tuesday, it goes into
That works. So an effective no more than 20, or no more, no
I-
less than
I-
24 hours after
I just-
declaration.
no, like, so
Yeah.
like if the city manager declares it noon on Monday, it wouldn't go in effect until midnight on Tuesday. So it gives people one full business day to respond.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's pretty easy to integrate here.
I
It'll just
thought it
integrate
would
them.
have been, we would have to approve it, and then it goes into effect. Am I
No, so
wrong?
the way it's written now is the administration will put it into effect. We have within 48 hours to meet to ratify it,
Oh.
but it goes into
Yeah.
effect first.
But if you want to flip it, we can flip it. We can have give the administration 48 hour, or the administration will schedule a meeting after recommending orange, which will go into effect 24 hours after council declares it, play with the language. But basically, council's making the declaration, your city manager is bringing it to you as a recommendation. So we can flip it if council wants to be at the forefront as opposed to.
I would like to flip it.
Okay.
I don't think that if in 24 hours and we haven't made a decision, that's not giving the public enough notice. I mean, that's a very short turnaround.
Problem is they might turn it off and then
to
we
turn
say
it back
it's fine,
on.
then, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think we can flip it. I think one of the things we'll just have to make sure we have a contingency plan for a lack of a quorum. You know what I mean? We're gonna just make sure we have, if for some reason within 48 hours, they're saying we have to do this, we just have a vessel that came in, we got 40 cases that just turned into 400, we've gotta do this. They need to be able to act. If they can't, for some reason, we have a breakdown on the council. I highly doubt that, but we just need to plan for it. So I'll put something in.
Unless a quorum can't be obtained.
Yes, and then it will require mayor and one other council member and the manager making a decision,
Councilmember Osenka?
Can I just say, in my view, the way I'm seeing this, and that just totally takes away any emergency anything. You're basically just saying, oh, we're going to declare that it's an orange, level orange, but we're going to take 24, 36 hours to do that. It just doesn't, then it's just a special meeting.
Yeah, but the
Basically.
other thing is, by the time you have whatever the cases are, those people are already infected, you just don't know that.
Well, but you don't know how many others are infected that you don't know. They're kind of eliminating the whole emergency side of this, it seems like to me, if we're.
Councilmember.
I understand what you're saying, but I also think there's really broad guidance of what is an emergency and what isn't, and what people, and that has changed mindsets. But if you're willing to stand by saying, I'm going to shut you down, and then I may open you back up, or you may be shut down.
That's not good.
I'm not going to tell somebody that until the whole council would make that decision and had enough time to hear back from the public for that, especially how we've gone and made decisions and then had to come back and change them again. So if you're willing to say that I'm fine, you can say that, but I don't think that that's the right way to do it.
It's not a matter of me being willing to say that, it's a matter of me saying, it's not an emergency. We'll have a meeting, let's have a special meeting, put your notice out.
Well, but I
We'll
think
enforce
that
it in
I'm-
48 hours.
Well, I trust administration and the medical community to see ahead that something's happening.
Right.
Like they're not gonna say, holy crap, at 10 o'clock in the morning, we need to do a code red and there's a code red by 5. I mean, hopefully they see the writing on the wall as things are coming in.
Okay.
So the way I'll draft it is I'll have the incident commander make a declaration of orange alert, in the procedure, that will become effective after council approval. Council approval will be given within, or a meeting will be convened within 48 hours. The orange alert will be effective no less than 24 hours.
No, I think you should say it a minimum of one, or after one full business day.
Yeah, business day, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, one
Because
business
then that
day.
gives people a whole business day to close.
Yeah.
Councilmember Sega, are you?
Yep.
Right.
Because it's,
All right, so that's the draft coming back, we'll have that.
Because we would have a meeting, I would
Procedure.
presume, in the evening. And so people would get notice that night and during that following day, and then they would have that day to ramp down. And then close.
That makes sense.
and then presumably if there were multiple cases, there would be contact tracing going on with those anyway, regardless of what we do, so, you know, it wouldn't be like everybody's just gonna stop until we make a declaration, I mean, so. There will be
Public health.
spreading, but
Yeah, safety.
Yeah, and DHSS they'll be issuing either quarantine recommendations or quarantine mandates and orders based on the situation, so. Or should be, they probably will be. Okay, I think those were my only direct questions. Is there anything else in here that you guys want to see
Well, you know, one
changed?
thing that was really important to Seward was churches meeting. So this goes back to no religious in-person services, is that right?
Yes, it goes back to the,
Ten.
it's just the mandate itself. And if you go to, just so everyone can go through this together, it's Appendix C in the back has health mandate.
And that's page 2 of 3 where we talk about that?
Yes, it says 1 of 3 because it's just a copy of the mandate, but this incorporates it in, and so you're going back to,
The beginning.
weddings, faith gatherings, it's like 1E.
Outdoor activity,
Funeral.
I see.
so this was back to hunker down. So
Public or private gatherings. And so when we do this, will we have, so that's the other thing then, is when we do something like this, just for our roadmap, will it have a recommendation on how long? Like it will have an end date, it won't be like just wide open, right?
If I was involved in something like that, I didn't mandate that I have an end date, but it should have an end date. And the reason why is when we do social distancing at this level, there are implications for our procedural and substantive due process rights as well as our rights to privacy, right? And also Establishment Clause rights and freedom of religion, all kinds of things that we need to pay attention to. And when we do that, they look for notice, the state of the emergency, we look at the temporary nature of the declaration. And so we just got a case down from Wisconsin Supreme Court. It's our first case where they're looking at what a state did with the social distancing guidelines, and the court is looking at that. It's looking at
Consistency.
transparency, temporary status, and we're not using it as a pretext to do something untoward, right? So that was a long answer, but it was a yes.
Broadness too. They
Yes.
don't want to be like, okay, like some of the governors were like, everything but churches. Well, you don't want to pull groups out because then it causes some legality there. Or include some that shouldn't be.
Yeah,
It's got to be very broad.
The goal is to stick close to the state so that we are protected by the state in the sense that this is
Yep.
what they adopted in response to what should be, if we are declaring it, a state that warrants this. If we deviate from that, we lose some of the protections and expose ourselves to potential liability.
And then you and I spoke via email because there were some community concerns about some of the language, but maybe you can talk about, that you're working on this statewide, correct, with different communities?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and so one of the things, when we first sent this to council, it was really just I kind of quick and dirty went through,
Yeah.
looked at places I thought that would be, that would work for
Similar.
Seward, but it was just, do you guys want to go down this road? Because it does cost money and time to take the steps to tailor it for a community. The great thing here, and it can change, but in this particular case, Seward was not the first one to go down this road and as a result benefited financially from that because the work product was there. So last month when we decided to throw that that proposal at you, I think I spent maybe an hour and a half adapting a plan. Now I put more time into it once we got council direction to, to move forward, but where the original plan had several days in it, bringing it into fruition. That said, sometimes Seward's on the other end of that.
Yeah, true.
But on this one, this was really a benefit to Seward, so that's good.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Could you just tell us how many total billable hours that you spent on this right now that we're going to be charged for?
I don't know. I can give you a report on that, but I know how many hours I spent last month because I have my bills finalized for last month and they're all in, but I didn't go back and calculate how many hours I spent on it this month.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to break
Yeah,
that out
and
and
if you could
include it?
separate it, because maybe we could use CARES Act funding to pay for this rather than just our general.
Oh, absolutely,
we're-
all of
yeah.
your COVID, so what I've been doing with your COVID work is you have an itemized separate invoice for COVID-19 for that matter, and I've made every effort to frame each entry in a way that ensures reimbursement, because while there's a lot of uncertainty about what you can get, what you can use aid for, we are very hopeful, and I have every reason to believe that COVID-19 preparedness documents, the legal fees that have resulted from interpreting mandates and drafting rules all fall within a reimbursable expense. So that's all done. And your invoice from this month, you can really see the breakout of what, so that's an excellent idea, and absolutely, I'm not sure if any of I think we've been trying to submit things as they've contemporaneously, because even without, if for some reason those funds fell through, there are other funds and assistance that are associated with your declaration of emergency that should cover your COVID legal fee.
Thank you.
So we don't need to adopt anything. That was great. Thank you very much. Now we're on the citizen comments. Are there any citizen comments, Madam Clerk? No, ma'am. Thank you. Next is council administrative comments and responses. Councilmember Osenga, did you have any comments?
No, thank you.
Councilmember Kreitz?
I don't.
Councilmember Cease?
No, thank you.
Councilmember Buckland? Vice Mayor McClure?
No.
And I have no comments, so we'll go ahead and adjourn at 6:44.